In the wake of Joe Biden pulling out of the presidential race, it would be a massive mistake to focus all of your energy on Kamala Harris. Indeed, many political observers, brilliant minds, burnt kilowatts of incandescent mental energy focusing on Biden for months and months and months and months. And now that he's gone, all of their efforts have been wasted. And at the end of that long range of focus, no edification was achieved. If we want to actually save America, if we want to actually beat the enemies of our republic, peacefully of course, if we want to actually conserve and restore our republic to its strongest form, we need to focus on much more than Kamala. And in this video, I'm going to actually walk you through how to do just that. Before we get into all that, my friends, I hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. I am your host. If you enjoy political and social commentary from a philosophical lens, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe. The revolution of the mind is upon us, my friends. And I believe it's going to be patriots like you and me that help bring it forth into the 21st century. I'm so excited. Now let's get into this video. So, a lot of people in the wake of the Biden announcement are understandably focusing their efforts and their attention on Kamala. They're bringing up her personal life, they're bringing up her race, her gender, they're bringing up her tendency to cackle, they're bringing up a lot of things. And while I understand that our environment, our current digital environment, which uses the algorithms to push certain things in front of us, promotes us to look at certain things over other things, we can't be distracted. Because guess what? Kamala Harris is not what this is about. Joe Biden is not what this is about. We are at a moment right now in our country where these individuals are not actually who matter. Because these people, these individuals, represent phenomena that go way beyond them and that in all reality are already transpiring in our society. So let's not focus on Kamala Harris or her personal life or whatever. Let's focus on what Kamala Harris represents. Because by focusing on what Kamala Harris represents, our message will outlive her political term. Let me say it again. By focusing on what Kamala Harris represents, our message, our agenda, our philosophy will outlive her time in politics. The problem is we have a politics of limitations that oftentimes happens in this country, and conservatives have an absolutely terrible time with this, where we focus all of our attention on a person, and we define ourselves by that person we're focusing on, as opposed to defining ourselves by the philosophy, the values, and the ethos that we seek to establish here in America. And this was the danger of focusing so much on Biden. I have seen so many articles, so many videos, so many news segments focused on Biden's dementia or Hunter Biden's problems, and yet, while that was happening, conservatives failed broadly to articulate a positive agenda that was an alternative to the vision of America that Biden presented. So if we're going to understand Kamala beyond Kamala, if we're going to understand what Kamala Harris represents, I have to take you back through the history of progressivism and take you to someone who you may know or may not know, is very removed from us due to time, but who can really show us exactly the kind of person Kamala Harris is, and that would be Woodrow Wilson, the sort of father of modern day progressivism. This is the man who brought us the Federal Reserve. This is the man who posed an idea of a new freedom, where freedom was inextricably linked with government control over society. This was the man that believed the government should not have to be bound by the Constitution, but instead should be bound by considerations, by democratic interests, as opposed to the Constitution. And where the Constitution fails, democratic interest, according to Wilson, should take over. And this is the man who articulated and wrote the playbook that modern day progressives, knowingly or unknowingly, use in their everyday lives, their political lives rather. So, in a speech called Leaders of Men, Woodrow Wilson provides this dichotomy. First of all, he's talking about leadership and what it takes to be a good leader, more broadly speaking. But he provides this dichotomy that's very interesting, and I think you see this dichotomy happen and play out in American politics. He provides this dichotomy between what he calls the leader and the writer. Now, the writer is the person, according to Wilson, who is very specific, exact, and mindful of the complexity of various things that happen to occur in society. The writer is going to be the thinker, the person who actually thinks through things. But according to Wilson, the leader will speak in broad strokes, absolutes, and generalizations. And this means the leader will not actually tell you what he means to tell you. He will tell you what he believes will sway your mind to his cause. This is why Woodrow Wilson was actually criticized. If you look at a book from David C. Gumper, he was actually criticized for not saying what he believed. But Wilson quite literally set up this method that enabled him and those in his camp not to say what they believed, because they believed that saying what you believe and reaching a certain audience were two mutually exclusive goals that had to be treated differently. Now, look at what Kamala does all the time. I've covered her speeches on this channel. I've covered her sayings on this channel. That whole what can be unburdened by what has been.
I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been, you know?
I've did a video about it. I'll link it in the comment section down below. But that is a general, absolute, floating statement that has no anchoring in reality. But when you understand Wilson's dichotomy between the leader and the writer, it's clear that Kamala is taking the role of the leader in Wilson's dichotomy. When she says there's great significance in the passage of time.
And talking about the significance of the passage of time, right? The significance of the passage of time. So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time in terms of what we need to do to lay these wires.
When you understand the leader and the writer, it's clear that Kamala Harris is taking the example of the leader. These are general statements that disarm you, that confuse you, but that signal certain things to certain groups of people and get the message in an emotional way, which then inspires them to go ahead and move on and vote and support them. So you have a politics of emotion and sensation as opposed to a politics of rationality. That's what's going on here. That's her methodology. And so if we understand this, we can then understand how progressivism has kept getting through in our current political landscape. Kamala Harris, in her first rally, ever since being the presumptive nominee, said, in reference to a bunch of ideas, that we are moving forward. And the crowd then began to shout, forward, forward, forward. And so what Kamala Harris was doing there, she was embodying indeed the progressive ethos. The entire idea that the government, authority, is the prime mover of society. If you're running for president of the United States, who gives you the moral right or legitimacy to tell us as a society that we are all going to go ahead and move in the direction that you want us to go into forward? That is hubris, a kind of hubris that is endemic to the old world political systems of Europe and Asia and all those other places around the world, but a hubris that was rejected soundly in 1776 by our founders and by the statement of natural law Americanism, which says that the individual in his community are the legitimizers of power, not some bloodline, not some status-driven idea. And yet the progressive says, no, we are going forward, and as a president, as a person in power, I will move us forward. That's hubris. That articulates an alien idea of the American life. But then what happens? There's moral terms that flow from this idea, this progressive ethos. You can achieve progress politically. And those moral terms are such that they will then castigate anyone that opposes the progressive agenda or opposes the idea to move forward by then saying, this person is against progress, and therefore, there has to be some level of antagonism. This is how this works. The progressive phrases his agenda benevolently, and then cause all of their opponents, people that hate progress, which then, without even considering their arguments, makes people not like that person. We call this a thought-terminating cliche. This is not about Kamala Harris. This is not about Joe Biden. This is not about the election. This is about a civilizational issue. See, there are problems in our society. There's two categories of problems. There is electoral problems and there's civilizational problems. So many of us have been conditioned by our media to see electoral problems everywhere and to not pay attention to civilizational problems. An electoral problem is like your local city councilor is embezzling funds, or he's being dishonest and giving hand-me-downs to local city contractors, and he needs to get voted out of office. That's an electoral problem. A civilizational problem is when someone tries to reshape your country, when someone rejects the very foundation, the very foundational DNA of your country, imposes their own agenda, and seeks to impose that agenda by political force. That's a civilizational problem, because we've gone beyond an election, and we've now spanned the entire life of that civilization. What we're dealing with right now, my friends, is not merely an election problem. Elections are important, but they're not everything. And all this electoral analysis misses this very, very, very simple point. By focusing entirely on Kamala and not what she represents, we endorse the idea of factionalism. Factionalism is a result of focusing on people. Because if you are a factionalist, you will focus on A, the person, and then B, how to beat the person. And your interaction with ideas, to the extent that you do interact with ideas, will happen only in the context of that person, which then means you will not be able to interact with ideas fully. You will only be able to interact with ideas within the context of a person. So the person is your focus, not the actual ideas that are significant to the survival of your civilization. That's another danger of the approach of focusing too much on Kamala Harris. By focusing instead on progressivism and calling out its various motifs, mores, and ideas, as opposed to focusing on a person, we can actually destabilize this toxic ideology and drive it out of organized society. It's very different. When you're talking about a person, people begin thinking in other terms. People begin thinking, well, you're being mean to this person, you're being too harsh on this person. But when you're speaking about an idea, those same terms that shut our ears to new information aren't necessarily there. They can be there, most certainly, especially if you have faith or you're a religious person. But it all depends on how you talk about it, and the terms, most importantly, are different. That is why. So if we want to actually challenge progressivism, if we want to actually face it and actually critique it, it's going to be best to focus on the ideas itself. But if you needed more evidence, this is not about Kamala, but about the ideas she represents. Let's look at a few of her positions, shall we? Kamala Harris wants to increase the minimum wage. So she wants to subvert the laws of economics and instill a rule, a mandatory rule on private enterprise so they can fit her idea of reality, even if that means higher costs for the consumer, even if that means higher costs for the employer, and even if that means lower access to those services because they have to economize. But Kamala Harris wants to, again, increase the minimum wage. Kamala Harris has talked about potentially regulating meat consumption, so she wants to control exactly what you might want to eat. Kamala Harris has talked about providing mandatory paid familial leave, paid maternal leave. Now, there's nothing wrong with paternal leave in principle, but there absolutely is something wrong with telling a small business that you have to provide this thing, even if it goes against your bottom line, and if you don't, we'll fine you or shut you down. How more anti-American or anti-social or anti-middle class, that's the sacred cow of the Democratic Party, right? Middle class can you be to support this kind of stuff? Kamala Harris keeps dredging up these ideas that are old, rooted in old notions of central management of society, rooted in old notions of progressive equality, rooted in old notions of their idea of class liberation that are being exercised through her. People are simply vessels for ideas. If we had, in the conservative movement, spent our time debunking, attacking, critiquing, and destabilizing the notion of those ideas in our society today, then, my friends, someone like Kamala Harris would not have the political viability to become president. But because we attack people and not ideas that were defeated or were proven wrong 60 years ago, socialism can still pop back up with a new face. This moment is too important for us to continue down this mediocre path. This is not about Kamala. This is about progressivism. But let's also confront a very important reality that so many people are refusing to confront. The barbarians have already stormed the gates. The barbarians are already within the walls of our civilization. See, it's not Kamala you have to worry about. It's the socialist grassroots groups that are gathering in conferences that nobody watches, that are actively conspiring to take over our institutions. It's the teachers' unions that call people who support a presidential candidate an existential threat to democracy and then dehumanize them from there. It's the conniving think tank scholars that work with government and devise new ways to deceive you with things that look official and look evidentially based. It's the propagandists that exist at the highest heights of corporate media and the Pentagon that are conspiring to also deceive you to push war. It is so many different things that we have here at play. It's the military-industrial complex that seeks to blackmail your politicians to get them to go to war. It is so many different things. There's so many different varieties and forces here that are pushing our country towards a breaking point. And guess what? Their success or their failure doesn't really depend on the election. Their success and their failure depends on us as Americans standing up, pointing our fingers at them and saying, no, we reject your viewpoint of America. No, we will not endorse your worldview. And no, we will not sacrifice the Constitution for you. But if we focus so much on elections, these forces, these people, they'll be able to succeed. They'll be able to flourish in a way that disarms us, in a way that leaves us vulnerable to them. Until we realize that there are actually forces on the left that are already in our institutions, that are already wreaking havoc, we can then focus on the more important things. Whenever you see an event over these next few months, whether it be a campaign event or whatever, don't think Kamala Harris is doing this. Think to yourself, how is progressivism, how is this ideology, how is this philosophy advancing itself through this event? Because that way, my friends, we're going to have a better shot at actually dealing with this. There's a saying, great minds focus on ideas, small minds focus on people. It's not about Kamala. It's not about Joe. It's not about Obama. It's about a virus that has been in this country for over 125 plus years, that has been wreaking havoc through every institution in this country, and that will continue unless we, as Americans, as conservatives, wise up. That is my advice to all of you. The best result here of this election will be a mass awakening, a revolution of the mind within the people to know what to prioritize, what not to prioritize, and to strategize on how we can actually move forward and articulate a positive agenda of values that goes beyond a person and goes towards universal principles. That is my message. Everyone, thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get this message out there. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.